All right, we're jumping right into a really fascinating and pretty intense topic today: the deep, centuries-old conflict between the Catholic Church and the Freemasons. We're going to look directly at the Church's own official statements to really get to the heart of why, in its view, these two worlds are just fundamentally incompatible.
Wow. Okay, so right off the bat, the Church is not mincing words. This isn't some vague suggestion or a mild disagreement. This is the official, current ruling from the Vatican. And calling something a grave sin? Well, that's about as serious as it gets in Catholic teaching. It puts a person outside the state of grace. It's an absolute line in the sand.
So, you've got to be asking, right? Why? What on earth could lead to such a final, unbending judgment? How did this divide become so absolute? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack. We're going to break down the three big reasons the Church gives for this, based directly on its own explanations.
Okay, reason number one. And this isn't about the secret handshakes or weird symbols you might see in movies. Nope. The first conflict is much, much deeper. It's about the very foundation of what each group believes, what the Church calls Freemasonry's secular principles.
Now, check this out. On one side, you have the Masonic promise. During their initiation, a new member asks to receive light. They're promised a path to spiritual knowledge and eventually a place in a celestial lodge. But look at the other side. For Catholics, there's only one source of spiritual light and salvation, and that is Jesus Christ, period. So from the Church's perspective, Freemasonry is setting up a whole separate path to salvation that completely bypasses Jesus, and that's just a non-starter.
All right, so that's the big philosophical clash, but it doesn't just stay in the world of ideas. This brings us to reason number two. The conflict gets very real, very practical when you start looking at what actually happens inside the Masonic Lodge during certain rituals.
And here's a huge point of friction. Inside the lodge, to make sure everyone from any religion feels welcome, you are not allowed to mention the name of Jesus. Now, the goal might be inclusivity, right? To create a universal brotherhood. But for the Catholic Church, you can't be inclusive by excluding the single most important figure in its faith. It's seen less as an open door and more as a deliberate rejection.
And it gets even more dramatic. Take a look at this ritual for the 30th degree, which is pretty high up there. First, the candidate symbolically crushes the papal tiara, the Pope's crown, with his foot. Then he does the same to a king's crown. And after that, he swears an oath to fight against what the ritual calls spiritual tyranny. From the Church's point of view, this isn't just symbolism. This is a direct, ritualized act of aggression against the authority of the Pope.
And that leads us to the third and honestly the most blunt reason the Church gives. This one isn't about interpreting rituals or ideas. This is about straight-up hostile statements made by some of the most influential Masonic leaders in history.
And just listen to this. This is a quote from a guy named Albert Pike. He wasn't just some random Mason. He was one of the most important and influential figures in the history of American Freemasonry. And he wrote that the papacy is the torturer and curse of humanity. I mean, wow. There's just no wiggle room there. That's not a philosophical disagreement. The Church sees that as a declaration of war.
And it's super important to realize this isn't some new fight that just popped up. The very first papal ban on Freemasonry was way back in 1738. That's before the United States was even a country. Then you have guys like Albert Pike in the 1800s really cementing that hostility. So when you see that 1983 declaration, you gotta understand it's not a new rule, it's just the Church doubling down on a position it has held for centuries.
So after looking at the clash in principles, the rituals that are seen as hostile, and the history of really harsh words, we can circle right back to that modern-day judgment and see exactly how the Church got there. It all starts to make a certain kind of sense from their perspective.
And this is the word that really sums it all up: irreconcilable. That's not a word you use lightly. It doesn't mean difficult or complicated. It means there is no fix. There's no common ground to be found. It's like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. From the Church's point of view, the two systems are so fundamentally different, they just can't coexist.
So let's just recap the Church's bottom line here. 1. Masonic principles and Catholic doctrine are incompatible. 2. Because of that, joining is a grave sin. 3. The most immediate consequence of that sin is that you are forbidden from receiving Holy Communion, essential sacrament of the faith. And 4. This judgment is not up for debate, it's final and it remains unchanged.
All of this leaves us with a much bigger question, doesn't it? For many people, organizations like the Freemasons are about service, charity, and brotherhood. But the Church's stance forces a hard choice. It really makes you think, where do you draw the line between the community you belong to and the creed you believe in? It's a tough question, and definitely one worth thinking about.